This Holy Week and Easter Sunday will not be the same, of course, this year, since we cannot gather together in church. Still, we are to celebrate these holy days when Christ accomplished the work of our salvation. To help the Bennett Academy community and others to celebrate these holy days, we are offering these videos from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. They will be available on the Bennett Academy Facebook page. This video is the one for Palm Sunday, the beginning of Holy Week. Usually the Mass for Palm Sunday begins with a procession, during which we carry palms into the church. Yet if you watch through live streaming Palm Sunday Mass this year, you will not see a procession. There's no congregation there to have this procession with. Still, for this video, I want to read the gospel that would have been read if there were, at the beginning of that procession, if there were one. The gospel is from the Gospel of Matthew. When Jesus and the disciples drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find an ass tethered and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them here to me. And if anyone should say anything to you, reply, 'The Master has need of them.' Then he will send them at once." This happened so that what had been spoken through the prophet might be fulfilled. "Say to daughter Zion, Behold, your king comes to you, meek and riding on an ass, and on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did as Jesus had ordered them. They brought the ass and the colt and laid their cloaks over them, and he sat upon them. The very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and strewed them on the road. The crowds preceding him and those following kept crying out and saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was shaken and asked, "Who is this?" And the crowds replied, "This is Jesus the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." The Gospel of the Lord. This Gospel, as I said, normally begins at the very, very beginning of Palm Sunday Mass, right before the procession into the church. But also you'll recall that during Palm Sunday Mass, we read the narrative, the Gospel narrative of Jesus' Passion. So we start with this Gospel about Jesus entering victoriously into Jerusalem. What a high point, a celebration. But then later in the Mass, we read the Passion narrative, where Jesus is condemned to death, suffers horribly, and dies on the cross. So what a change of fortune. Everything's turned upside down. At first, Jesus enters victoriously to great celebration and praise. Then he's condemned as a criminal and put to a horrible death. Can we relate to this now that we're going through this coronavirus pandemic? We can relate to this great change of fortune. At one point, so many of us, things were going well for us. But then, in ways we could not imagine, we're now going through a worldwide crisis. Right? What a great change of events, great change of fortune. And Jesus experienced that, as we hear in this one Mass, his victorious entry into Jerusalem, then his condemnation, suffering and death later. So as we enter into Holy Week, we very much can relate to this change of fortune that Jesus went through. And this is what we want to do when we enter into Holy Week, to walk with Jesus as he walked these last days of his life. Right? So we walk with him as he goes into Jerusalem to face and endure his suffering and death. Due to the coronavirus, we will be hearing in the coming days, weeks, even months perhaps, we'll be hearing much about people's suffering and death, unfortunately. Jesus, though, is there with us. Jesus is there suffering with the suffering, dying with the dying. As we go through Holy Week, it is usually with a certain sadness as we think about what Jesus had to endure for our salvation. This year, all the more so, we have this great sorrow upon us from our current crisis. And we can join that sorrow from these current events to Jesus' sorrow as he enters into his suffering and death. It's very, very important to remember that this sorrow is not to lead to despair. We walk with heavy spirits, but also we walk with hope. Hope in God's power to save even from horrible situations. Just as God raised his son Jesus from death to the resurrection. So God is still at work to raise us up to new life. Right? That's what we believe, so we do not despair. As we journey through Holy Week, may God teach us the hope in him, even in the midst of suffering and death. May he teach us to put our trust in him, not in other things that can so easily change. But may we learn to put our trust in God. May God teach us to look to Jesus for our hope and the joy that belongs to that hope. And so as we enter into Holy Week, may the Lord bless us abundantly as we walk with Jesus through suffering and death, but ultimately to his resurrection and the great joy that comes with that. God bless you.